Good morning. Welcome to RIA Advisors Candid Coffee. We appreciate everybody joining us today. Going to get into a lot of different information. We've got a ton of great questions. I am Danny Ratliff here with Richard Rosso. We happy that you guys are here. We're going to talk about retirement income, all the different ways that you can take it. First and foremost, do have to do a little bit of housekeeping. We are Clarity Financial, DBA, doing business as RIA Advisors. Anything we say here, please don't take that as pure advice. We're just talking big picture. If you do have specific questions, if you'd like to visit with somebody, we'd love to help you maybe get more specific. But we're going to talk kind of real big picture here today. Rich, we're going to get into so many different topics on, how to recreate a paycheck in retirement, and maybe thinking a little bit outside the box. What do you think the first place to start would be?
Don't listen to anybody. Don't listen to your neighbors. Don't listen to, in other words, your retirement income is very, very personal to you. How your neighbor is doing it, how your relatives are doing it is going to be totally different than you're doing it. It's one of the most creative processes in the financial planning cycle because your lives are different, right? All this stuff people hear, oh, well, yeah, I should take Social Security at 62 because it's going away. Or, yeah, well, the annuities are the greatest thing since sliced bread. But that's all I buy. Or so what I'm saying is your stream of how you create your income is not going to be perfect and it's going to be different. So you have to sit with someone who's going to help you and is a specialist in what I call decumulation. So most financial advisors, most brokers are bred on accumulation, bringing money in, growing assets, but never really understood the decumulation cycle when you actually have to start taking money out. So I call that the tool time syndrome, right? So I don't know if any of you ever watched Tool Time, y'all, right? Tim Allen and Wilson. And so the thing is, when you get Tool Time, you got Tim Wilson, he's got his kids, Tim Allen has got his kids, he's got, his wife, and he talks to Wilson over the fence. And Wilson's always like this with his hat, right? And keep this in mind that his income, his goals are going to be totally different from yours. Tim is accumulating money for college, probably retirement, running his business, and Wilson is just trying to stay alive with a retirement income cash flow. Totally different. So this is where we're going to focus on Wilson's side of the fence today. So that you understand that when you speak to your financial advisors, they should be holistic in approach and help you with accumulation and also decumulation. And Danny, we don't see that, right?
No, we don't. I mean, that's the struggle. I feel like in this industry in general, they do a really good job on how do you put funds aside, what do you do, and maybe probably still not as good of a job as a whole as we should be doing, right? Thinking about all the different avenues. For so long, it's been about, put funds in pre-retirement accounts, build up the 401k. You want to save money today. And, things have changed quickly. I think just with this last election, we could have seen an environment where, these tax cuts expire or go up in another way where they actually have legislation. I think the odds are much higher that we have a little more flexibility and some room within the next several years to be able to get things done. But the challenge here is going to be, what and how much. I mean, look, we could wake up tomorrow. We've already seen, at 3 a.m. Trump will tweet, we're going to get rid of the IRS and create the ERS, External Revenue Service. And so I think that this is a challenge from a tax perspective in many different ways that are new, and it'll be changing and evolving quickly. But then, the old historical ways are, okay, dividend stocks, fixed income, looking at bonds. What are the other areas that you should be looking at? We hear a lot about annuities. We can utilize those as well. And we do in the right environments. There's other types of, private credit. There is closed-end funds. I mean, you name it. There's so many different options out there that it can, one, be overwhelming, but two, how does it all fit together? And I think that's the key, right? If you're kind of putting together a puzzle and creating different sources of income. And now that you are in that decumulation phase, I mean, we've talked about this in some of our bigger presentations. We call it the black hole or crossover risk when you go from an accumulator to a decumulator. And that presents probably psychologically one of the larger challenges people deal with. But at the end of the day, what exactly can you do to recreate that paycheck, have a really clear understanding as far as how all of these different investments work. You could turn on a radio show today. I know there's a lot of financial shows on Fridays or Saturdays, excuse me, get my days mixed up. That's not good. And we, as essentially, I've talked to plenty of people. I know you have, Rich, where they say, well, I've got this annuity. It's great. But what they've done is they put every dollar they have into something like that, and they don't retain much flexibility with it. And what we find is so many times they're sold and they're not planned for. And I think that presents a totally separate challenge in the sense of, number one, understanding it. I would say 90 some odd % of people that have a product like that don't actually understand exactly how it works. And because they're sold, right? I mean, I talked to somebody yesterday, and actually I talked to my dad about this. He called me. He heard a guy on the radio, and Rich, you'll appreciate this. He said, this guy told me told everybody, if they had $1 million, that he could get them $150,000 in income every single year. And it's like, well, wait a second. All right, is that an income rider? So basically he said, well, how does that work? And I mean, how many times have you heard that same thing, and where somebody actually will think, well, they're going to get 15% a year guaranteed, and then they could walk away with all of their funds if they don't want to take the income, when
Right.
really probably an income rider. And I didn't go and research or do any due diligence on this, but we hear these stories quite often, and it's like, okay, what type of company is it? What are the things you guys should be doing for due diligence when you look at that? How does it actually work?
Right.
I think that is another big conundrum.
Well, it is. Keep in mind, the first step of this is really understanding what kind of income you need, like how much do you need and how to break out the income that you need. In other words, I have income that I need for my fixed expenses, the things that I know I must pay, like rent or mortgage or insurance, food, right? There are things that I know I must have. And then there are things called variable assets or discretionary assets, and I need to know how much of that I need. So the first step for you is your advisor should help you to either pinpoint that amount, or you provide all your information and your advisor should say, well, here's how much you can have. Is this enough? But I really prefer the other side of it, where you do some fact finding about 5 to 7 years from retirement and start to really keep a budget or an idea of what your cash flow. In other words, where the money going and picture yourself in retirement, and where now what bills must be covered. And that's very important. So you got to start with the DNA of, what do I think retirement income should be?
Yeah.
Should I work part-time? Because I really would like to. Okay. Should I, how much do I need in annuities? If I need annuities at all, guaranteed income, we call those guaranteed income, right? Social Security's guaranteed income. How do I take that? So in other words, you got to start with a number. You got to start with putting everything together and coming up, this is what I need per month, inflation adjusted, to survive. And that is very, very important. Okay. And it's a blend of things, which is what this is about today. This is about how do you blend this together for you overall, but you got to go through the basics DNA steps that you can't avoid, which is, well, what do I need? I mean, we have clients that need very little every month. They live very simply. We've got clients that need a lot every month. And I still want to isolate those fixed from the fun stuff. Am I going to Italy every year? So my variable fund stuff, but what are the actual fixed expenses? And you got to break it down. It's a very much of a molecular kind of thing overall. So that's where you got to start. From there, you then put it together. So it's a canvas. This is a blank canvas that only you have, and colors only you have to paint what that end number is going to be. And no one's going to judge you for what the number is. What we try to do is help you work into the number. And is it feasible? And how long are you going to live? And your spouse? How healthy are you? I don't know a lot of people who know exactly when they're going to die, and I can't really figure that out. But longevity risk is very important. People live longer today. Dementia, Alzheimer's risk is very important. You can live a decade with that kind of disease, be physically okay, and you need income to survive, possibly long-term care. So these are the things that you have to look at to figure out what is exactly going to be my decumulation strategy. And something Danny said earlier, when I first started in this business, the mantra was, you're going to fall to the lowest tax bracket when you retire. That's not necessarily the case. Because what people don't realize is there's federal taxes, which you're all focused on with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and whether or not that's going to sunset or not. And or the fact that you have what we call back pocket taxes that you don't talk about. Taxation on Social Security. I know President Trump talked about maybe abolishing that. Taxation on Social Security. Additional charges on top of your Medicare base premiums that can get pretty lofty. So these are the kinds of things that you have to, understand a holistic tax picture. And that when you're in the go-go years, active retirement, you might be spending about the same of what you spent in retirement. Maybe about 80% of it, but you're going to be sort of close. And just that, years ago, you would do that and you wouldn't be taxed as much. And this time around, it's different. So you have to really, Stan says, I never fell for that lower tax bracket. Good. Because it's not, but there are some people who do. Listen, that's why I say this is personalized, but these basic, broad-based rules of thumb, it's like someone, I think Chip said about age-based diversification rules. I hate those things. I hate these rules of thumb that say if you're 60 years old, let's figure out a formula. You're going to live to 100, say, your portfolio doesn't have to be stuck in one allocation forever.
Well, and that old formula for age-based is, take 100, subtract your age, and that's how much you should have in equities, which makes no sense, right? Market environments change, your income needs change, your growth needs change. There are opportunities that you want to be able to capitalize on in different environments. Now, some of it may just be a risk-oriented perspective as well when it comes to something like that, hey, if you know yourself and you cannot take just mentally the risk associated with the market, well, then maybe you don't need so much. I mean, we know people that are, I've got guys in their 30s that are strictly in bonds, and I know people in their 90s who are only in stocks, and it may be a perspective and experience. But also I think that, looking at these rules of thumb, they're not designed in general for you. So, Rich and I, we talk a lot about guardrails. Rich has put together a lot of, done a lot of study and analysis over the years and really honing in on, what are these rules of thumb that the mainstream media or financial world wants to tell us? And are they developed for you and I, or are they developed for their business, right? I mean, you can even go look at debt ratios. Well, it's designed to sell you something. Is that what we would encourage you guys to look at? Probably not. We would be in general more conservative with that because we think that, you should probably not get too far over your skis in that type of environment from a debt perspective. But the same thing can go for the allocation to different types of products and or asset classes.
Yeah. And like I said, you can share your opinions on what you think. The kids are gone, house is paid off, not my expense. Kids are not always gone. There are more older Americans with mortgage payments than ever. Okay, there are more older Americans who carry mortgages today than ever. That is going to be right. And if I don't have a mortgage, I might as well have a mortgage because my property taxes and my insurance costs are a mortgage. So my house is never fully paid off. Okay. Someone, I think Michael wrote something about he uses Monte Carlo and all that. So he's getting a little bit more sophisticated with it. That's true. You might be undercutting your spending though. And I'll tell you why. Because you're not going to inflation adjust your retirement income every year. You're not. I have clients who are in distribution mode for 25 years. They don't call me every year and go, hey, Rich, can you increase my distribution by the rate of inflation? No, right? You go through this. We write about, we have a program coming out soon, retirement income workshop we're created. But you really start off with what we call the retirement income smile, right? You have higher expenses in the beginning because you're active. And then I have a lot of clients that are in this other part of the smile, the main part of the smile, that they're not unhealthy. They just don't spend as much. They don't go out to eat as often. They're closer to home. They're not traveling to Europe or doing, they're slow. They're slowing down. They're not unhealthy, by the way. They're just reshifted. Oh, been there, done that in this active part. And then at the end of your life, you start to or as you age, you're starting to pick up more on the healthcare expense side, and that creates this smile. So inflation adjusted might just undercut some of your spending because you're not going to probably do that every year. So it depends on the rate of inflation you're using. We use different rates of inflation, and we study inflation from two areas of the Federal Reserve to figure out inflation per goal and inflation for Medicare, inflation for long-term care costs, and that kind of thing. So
Well,
yeah, go, slow go, no go. That's what Joel writes. That's pretty much sort of how it works, right? And again, I have clients, and you two probably too, Danny, that they don't call every year and say, please increase my, so we don't run plans raised based on inflation protection to some degree on an annual basis. We do it more on more of a cutting edge academic research that shows how people have actually spent throughout our time. I have nothing wrong with you doing the inflation protection important as far as what you're doing, but there's a point where even though inflation is going to affect you, your spending level is going to drop off.
Yeah, I've never had a client come to me on January 1st or in January and say, hey, I need my pay raise, right? Usually it's every 3 to 5 years. Hey, funds aren't going as far. Can we add a little bit, from our distributions, our withdrawals? And I think that's a big piece of it that, we see change over time. But our job from a planning perspective, we feel like, is to play devil's advocate, to stress the plan in many different ways. One thing that, Michael, you were asking, what are the things maybe I'm not looking at? Too often we see somebody use a flat rate of return. We don't have any sequence of return risk, or you don't see, assuming for those bad timing, the bad years. Yep. And, that can be detrimental, especially in the first years of retirement. And so going back to the question earlier on, how do you, navigate the amount you should have in different types of areas? That's a big piece of it as well, where we may say, hey, we are big advocates of an emergency fund, but also what we call a financial vulnerability cushion. So having funds in addition to that. And then in that first year or so of retirement, you may want to have even a little bit more ready to go in cash. So that way that if you do get a down market, you have other areas that you can pull from, and you allow your funds the ability to, to recoup those losses, and or you have funds on the side that you can actually physically go in and invest. And that's our strategy is different than most, where, that buy-in, the strategy where they say, hey, you're going to have X amount in stocks, X amount in bonds. We're a lot more fluid than that, where we can go and say, all right, we want to reduce our exposure right now, or we want to increase our exposure because we feel like we have the wind at our back. So we're going to do that automatically, especially in a down market. So you do have funds that you can go out and invest at better prices and play a little bit of defense. It's not perfect by any stretch, but we can mitigate risk. In markets, you can never completely avert risk. And that's, I think, one of the bigger keys. But from those are the things that we would look at. You have anything else that you'd add to that, Rich? Is from I guess one other thing, so I asked you a question, I'm going to answer it. You kind of talked about it a little bit, but, Rich goes in our planning software each and every year, and we go in and change the rate of inflation based on, actual real data. And so, your regular retirement living expenses are going to be different than what you have like on healthcare. Healthcare is going up between 5 and 6% each and every year. So those expenses are a little bit more. So one thing we would encourage each and every one of you to do, and you hit on this a little bit, Rich, would be go in and look and say, okay, what are the expenses that I have? Your basic retirement living expense. This is going to be, keep a roof over your head, fed, pay your taxes, protected, all those, the main necessities that you have to live. And then let's start breaking down each and every goal. And so you mentioned the retirement smile. Well, over time, you're going to travel. How long are you going to travel? Is it you want to spend, I'm making numbers up here, $10,000 on travel each and every year? Every 2 years, you're going to go take a trip to Europe, or you're taking the grandkids to Disney, and you want to pay for it all. And so we can start to factor that into it, and then look and say, okay, well, if you get the bad returns, how does that impact the plan? Can you still meet all those needs? But then understanding that you're not going to travel like that forever, but was that a 10 or 15 year time frame? What do you envision? And I think one thing that we see a lot is that people will sometimes, number one, with the plan, they feel like there's finality to it. So a lot of times like, oh, I don't want to do that, but we can go in and update it. It's a roadmap. And when we get a fork in the road because you decide, hey, I thought I wanted to do this, but we're going to go do X instead of Y. Great, let's go back and update the plan. But those need to be accounted for. And then another thing is, I think that a lot of times people don't put down like we want your needs, your wants, your wishes. And in those wishes, that should be your pipe dreams. Hey, I would love to go accomplish this. I don't know if we can do it. I think that's a great thing for people to actually put down, because our job is to figure out, number one, can you? And number two, what is the best way to get you there? And it may not be, you may not like the answer. It may not be, hey, that's probably not achievable. But if you really want to do that, here's some ways that maybe you can get there. And so I think that's not a bad way to look at it.
It is. You had a lot of coffee today, like me.
You know, it's funny. This is my first cup. I hadn't even finished it.
Yeah. Energy. We're gonna get to questions we've gotten. I just want to go through some of the chat here. So one of the things I want you to remember: thoughts on mortgage, no mortgage. Listen, house doesn't grow in value. I have clients that have mortgages at 2 or 3%, and it's just part of their plan, right? And because a house is a block of ice, that's illiquid. You have now turned that asset illiquid unless you're going to use a home equity conversion mortgage, right? We have a lot of people we know who are house poor. They have no cash flow, and cash flow is the lifeblood of retirement. Don't misunderstand this, or don't minimize this fact. Cash flow is the most important thing when it comes to retirement. Yes, you need growth, but cash flow is your lifeblood. Without cash flow, you're done. And a house, there's no cash flow. So if you can turn that house, I have clients that do have home equity conversion mortgages, and they don't want to move, and that's perfectly fine. I have clients who do have mortgages at low rates, and there's no reason to pay them off. I can go in a high yield savings account and still get close to 4%. And listen, the Fed's not going to be lowering rates as soon as they are. The market's like a big baby that wants its bottle, and it's not going to get it. So if you are investing in fixed income and cash, you are still going to get fairly decent yields. And that's part of your portfolio. Yeah, Rich is right, man. You can't get a word in with Lance anyway, because I don't know what Lance is on, but there's some high octane stuff in that coffee. So you have to keep this in mind, that all these ideas we're hearing about closed-end funds and dividend stocks, this is all great, but it's not an all or none. There's a lot of these guys that write books on closed-end funds and all this stuff, they're thinking about selling product. I think that's the most important or greatest product in the world. And I'm telling you, it's a canvas of different products. There's not an annuity salesman out there that will tell you that annuity is not the best thing in the world. And I'm not saying they're trying to misrepresent. They probably really truly believe that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with closed-end funds or dividend stocks, but you have to set rules and boundaries around all this. It's never all or none with retirement income, because all of it is all not going to work at the same time. So keep that in mind. You have to figure out in the financial plan, here's where my cash flow is coming from. Segment to dividend stocks, segment to closed-end funds, segments to guaranteed income. I had a professor who's a mentor of mine, big finance professor, and he said to me, Income Nirvana is if all my fixed expenses are paid by guaranteed income. If everything went to zero in my variable assets, and they're not, if you're investing wisely, yeah, you can have bad years, but think about that. If everything goes to bust, if I have pension, Social Security, and/or an annuity structure catered to me to cover my fixed expenses, then if there's a derail in the market, I just cut back on my variable expenses, but I can always pay for the roof over my head. That's how he invests. That may not be right for you, but there's something to be said about two legs of guaranteed income and another leg of variable assets in the portfolio. Closed-end funds are great until rates go up, and then they're leveraged and they come down like a rock. You got to be so careful with those things. There are a lot of them I like if you buy them at deep discounts, but you just can't set those things and forget them. Because if the interest rate environment changes, you're going to look at your principal and go, oh my gosh, what happened? Okay. Dividend stocks. If you don't monitor those companies, listen, Walgreens had the best dividend yield ever. Walgreens had the best. There was dividend. Every dividend list has Walgreens on it. Oh my gosh, this is a dividend aristocrat that just stopped its dividend. If you don't monitor those dividend companies and wondering where the dividend's coming from, leverage or cash flow, and where sales are going, that dividend can go away. So you have to keep that in mind. So when I get a question about it, should I have a mortgage or should I not have a mortgage? Well, it depends on where all your other money is. If my mortgage rate is 7%, so so this is some question that I'm sure we're going to get on this chat. How many times do you get, Danny, a client that say, listen, my mortgage is like $200,000 and I'm going to stay in my house. I'm going to just take it out of my IRA.
Ooh.
Pay it off.
Yeah. Often. And so that is, when we talk about that mortgage, no mortgage, especially where rates are right now, a lot of times, you've refinanced, you've got a really low interest rate. You're using a bit of arbitrage, so to speak, in the sense that, you can still get paid more on your funds. It used to be having the mortgage was kind of really nice, especially when we had standard deductions that were much lower. So if you were itemizing, you would do that, but most people don't fall under that now. And so, you always put it in a really good way. You're turning water into ice. And so it's harder to chip away at it if you need it. And so having some of that liquidity may be more beneficial. But for some people, it's strictly peace of mind. I mean, we know plenty of people where, hey, you have the assets, you can do it either way. But as you mentioned, if now you start thinking about those back pocket taxes, as you alluded to earlier, now all of a sudden you're having additional taxes on top of that. So keep in mind what Rich was referring to was IRMA for Medicare. So if you're 63 is really when we need to start thinking about that, because there's a 2-year look back. And if you take too much money out and it's not a life-changing event, you're going to pay more in Medicare premiums. So essentially, it's not just about, how do you recreate that paycheck? Where do you invest your funds? But it's also how do you, while you're still working, accumulate, but then give yourself opportunities to have options and decumulation so that you can minimize those taxes. So a lot of it's just keeping more money in your pocket as well. That's another way that I think is so often overlooked when we're trying to establish return.
No, it's true. So Douglas has a really good question. So think about the spirit of this question. If I had Social Security benefits that cover living expenses for mortgage, car loan, debt, other than paying taxes, should I focus on inflation and investable assets be considered state of accumulation? Yeah, you're going to do accumulation by accident, which is a good thing. In other words, you will probably still want to tap that more than an accumulator. So let's call you a decumulator-lite, because there's going to be something that you're going to want to do in retirement, right? You're going to want to do something in retirement, take a vacation, splurge on something with the grandkids. You're going to want to do something, and that would be great off of your more variable assets, especially a year like last year. Last year, we were telling clients goal scoop. And what goal scoop means is you wanted to take the kids on that Disney trip, your grandkids, do it. You're going to do it in 2028, do it next year. You're going to do kitchen renovation, do it now. Because those kinds of returns we don't think are going to happen this year. So yeah, you have the grace. If you have fixed income, or just say guaranteed income, and guaranteed income is usually guaranteed. Someone said guaranteed income is not always guaranteed. It depends. There are a lot of insurance companies that made it through the financial crisis, right? And if Social Security goes away, we're all going to be camping on Lance's lawn, and he's not going to like that. So that
you won't get past his moat and alligators.
It's coming. He's got a big general outside his house. It scares me. It's like a statue. I'm like, what is that? It's like a guard. He's got. So and Social Security can't go away. You just can't. You have too many people who depend on it. I mean, the fact is, you just can't. You can talk about how it's going to run out of money. You can do everything you want to do and do that. But if you don't fix it, you're going to have a lot of people on the street. And that is just unfortunate. But that's the way it is. So it has to be fixed.
Yeah, I mean, and to talk about that, go a little further into the numbers, over 60%. So actually, over 60% of people rely on it for more than half of their retirement income. So think about that. A quarter of the people and who are retired rely on it for more than 90% of their income. So, we talked about inflation, the problems with that. Some of these people just don't have, number one, the means to even have the conversation like we're having right now. But the other caveat to that is you're literally going to be stepping over people in the street if they don't have another solution to Social Security, or figure out a way to make this, to solidify it and fortify it.
Scary. It's scary. I'm telling you, everyone, listen, even if you saved everything for retirement and you have a great plan and you were a super saver, as Danny and I would call you, your plan works okay because we're expecting much lower returns for asset prices over the next 10 years. When you take Social Security properly and you're getting $5,000 a month, $4 to $5,000 a month, that's not chump change. That is bringing your plan over the top. And that's most likely the only pension you've got.
Yeah.
Right? Because Social Security, when it was first created, was not supposed to be the pension. It was supposed to complement the pension you were supposed to get.
Well, and back then people actually had physical pensions. You were seeing those defined benefit plans. You were seeing, you think about, we got to go back all the way to 30s when we had this, right? The average life expectancy was right where most people actually started Social Security. Life expectancy was not nearly as long as far as it is today. And so, that it presents a much bigger challenge because we have a significant demographic issue. We had like 16 people putting into Social Security for every one worker. And now it's flip-flopped. A lot more people relying on it.
A lot more people. So if you have some sort of smart immigration, or you take some of the people once you get the criminals out and you get these elements of people who are working here, and you can have them to pay into the system. We need that because our demographics are terrible. Nobody's having children because they're expensive. Ask Danny. That's what people look at. Okay. It's onerous to raise children today.
Yeah.
Unless Douglas can adopt me, I'll be a great son for him.
Yeah. Right, man.
Yeah. So I don't know what Rattland is, but I'd sound like I'd like Rattland. I think Rattland would be fun for me. I know I would like that because I'm into horror. So if there's a lot of rats, I'll be fine with that. So I'm saying that with Social Security, it's always a hotbed of arguments, and you have to find a way to keep it. You have to.
Yeah.
So hey, Rattland, I finally got it. That's pretty funny, actually. I'm going to start using that.
That's one I've never heard of. We get so much grief. I haven't taken the kids there yet, and I'm not sure I will. But every time I talk to somebody, they talk about how expensive it is. I'm like, dude, it just doesn't.
I took my daughter in 2004, and I'm not kidding. I think then I spent about $3,000.
Well, years ago, when the kids were little, we had
now.
Yeah.
It's.
We had some friends ask us years ago, and I said, "Well, how much are you in for already?" And it was like $10,000 or $11,000, and I was like, "Yeah, no, we're gonna skip that."
No, that's true. Christy says lift the cap. I think she's talking about the wage cap on Social Security. Yeah, that would do it. You know what I would love to see, Danny, and I know this is going to get flack for this. All the stuff we're doing to cut. What was that? USAID. All those expenses we're cutting. I would love to see some of that money go right into the trust fund.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, I want to know that it's going to redirect right into the trust fund and buy the treasuries that are in that trust fund to bolster the system. Because we're all going to use Social Security.
That's right.
And if we pay payroll tax, we know where the money goes.
Well, so they haven't even started on the military and the Department of Education. You think about all the money they've just found over the last week that's being frivolously spent. Man, you're going to see a big change. Hey, so real quick before we move on, we do want to give away a Candid Coffee mug. We appreciate you guys being here. Brent is going to get the Wheel of Fortune out and pick the lucky winner. We will send it to you guys.
You could bring it to Rattland. I'm going to use that all day. Thanks, Doug. I'm going to be fine driving everybody crazy with that today.
Oh, man. I hadn't heard that one, and we're at that age where,
we should have heard everything.
Kind of that time. Uh-oh, here we go. Who is it?
Uh-oh, it's the wheel. Yay.
All right, Veronica Pearson, congrats. If you would, we'll have Brent and Michelle reach out. We will make sure that we get you a mug, get your information. So thank you guys for joining. We'll do this again here before the end. We try to keep these things right at an hour. We've got a ton of questions, so I know you're giving me grief for talking fast. We're trying to get through a whole lot of information really quickly, and we want to make sure we can get to most of these questions.
All right, you guys are so engaged. What a great chat. Someone did more mention about moving to a lower cost state. I ran an adjustment for someone who is moving out of New York City and is going to move to Texas. And it took his plan from unsuccessful to successful because of how much he's going to cut in costs with his family.
You know,
so moving, although I don't know if Florida is that much of a low cost state anymore, Danny. If you've seen property prices, I mean, they're out of control.
You know, if you're not leaving one of the states with super high income taxes, I think that it becomes more of a challenge, because many times we run these analysis and they'll say, well, okay, I'm getting away from state income taxes. Well, okay, are you buying a property? What is it worth? Or do they have property taxes? What are those rates? You know, what are registrations? We looked up one state, and to register your vehicle every year, it was like $500. And so you start just adding them up. In some areas, it may not be nearly as beneficial as you would think, but you know, California, New York, some of those very high tax states, it typically can go a long, long way.
Listen, when I first started school, I went to Southern Illinois University, which was a great school, by the way, hidden gem. I could buy a house there right now for $220,000 with nobody around me, like no people, just a lot of goats. You can find a house up there. You just have to realize you're not going to be in the middle of everything. And frankly, I don't want to be. So see, my retirement income goals and what I want to do is going to be very different from someone else. You have to remember that is Jane Lynch's alma mater. So I think that, again, we're going to get to the questions, but we're also going to have a presentation coming up on retirement income. We can do it in person for you who can make it. We'll hear more about it, and eventually we may do it online as well. So since we have such a good response to how everything is, you know, about this topic, because I don't think this topic gets talked about enough, Danny. So go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, so we've got a ton of great questions. You guys keep asking them here in the chat as well. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. So, you know, here is a good one from Stan. So if there's someone who is 63 and plans to work to at least 67, maybe even 70, and his wife is 61, would it make sense generally for her to start taking her Social Security at 62? Asking for a friend, of course.
When you take Social Security, it is not your decision. It's, if you're married, it's joint decision. So if someone's 63, the worst is 67 and 70, his wife is 61, younger, women outlive men. He should wait to take Social Security to leave a higher survivor benefit for her, because I don't know how much she's paid in versus her, right? So yes, could it work where she could take her own benefit at 62? You got to run the numbers, but that could work. And then switch to a higher survivor benefit, a higher spousal benefit. But everybody's different. But the most important thing is you're asking the question. Well, your friend's asking a question about how to work with both parties. And that's important. That's absolutely important to do. Generally speaking, the higher wage earner, especially married to a younger wage earner who hasn't paid in as much, should be looking at survivor benefits. And listen, we're dealing with all kinds of situations now. Did you see Bill Belichick at 72 with his 24-year-old girlfriend? You got any comments? You got anything going on there in your head?
I know what you're thinking. You're like, there's still hope.
Well, I'm trying to say to you is, yes, it is. Saluki is SIU Carbondale. There are a lot of older men getting married to younger women and having children. And they'll ask me questions about their Social Security, and I'm like, I don't care about yours. I care about yours for your spouse and your kids. Everybody's life is different. And no financial advisor is going to judge what you're doing. They just want to help you make the right decision. Can you take Social Security at 24? No. That's actually funny. She can take his Social Security, but no, she can't. So yeah, I don't know about some of the comments we're getting. So I'm just saying is, yes, that is a possibility that she can take hers, but we need more information.
Yeah.
Look,
so
Brian
great.
Gleason says, I've listened to many perspectives on this as my wife is 9 years younger. Work till 70 to maximize her survivor benefit. Bingo.
Yeah,
Unless she's a high wage earner, and they might not matter.
that's right.
If she's a high wage earner, like you have people that are both paid in, or I have like max earners, and it's like, well, you both can wait till 70. Then I'm looking at more independent decisions. But to your point, Brian, that's absolutely first. Well, Thomas, he doesn't have to die first. She can get a spousal benefit. Yeah.
All right. So Richard also asked, we're going to try to get to a lot of these, so we're going to kind of start firing away here just from a time perspective.
Go ahead.
Should you always take a survivor benefit in a pension? I don't think this is a stupid question at all. I think this is a great question.
It's a great question.
If this is going to depend on, what other type of guaranteed income that you may or may not have, the age difference between you and your spouse, it's going to depend on your health. That's a big part of it as well. Generally speaking,
helping the spouse.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, yes. I mean, we would typically encourage you to take the full 100%, and you're going to get a little bit of a haircut than if you took it just on your own life. But ideally, yes. Now, I would tell you this, going back to like psychological impact, we talked about people who kind of go from that accumulator to a decumulator, and then markets, how people feel about that. There are some instances right now with rates that have been higher over the last year or two where you could go out on the secondary market and purchase like a single premium immediate annuity, get a very similar type of benefit. And now you have that where it's still going to be 100% spousal benefit should you pass away. But if, God forbid, both of you pass away, then there's actually something for, the kids, whoever you're leaving a legacy towards. Whereas within that pension, you could get one paycheck and the funds are completely gone. So we do look at it like that. And, sometimes like I have a client, for instance, who is very, very adverse to volatility. And we all are to some extent. And we actually looked at, he had a pension and said, well, does it make sense for you to go ahead and take the pension? His plan actually looks fantastic both ways. Really good saver, lives well beneath their means, doesn't have really, crazy intense in retirement. In fact, I can argue they could spend more money. But for him, it was, in fact, they had enough fixed income already coming in to meet their basic living expenses and then some. But for them, it was like, okay, if you do this, can you now compartmentalize your other funds to actually not aggressively grow them, but invest them for growth? Now that we can put those to the side and say, this is going to be the icing on the cake, but we know if it's going to have some volatility, it's going to be okay. You're not having to necessarily pull down from here. And long-term, your heirs, which they have a legacy intent, are going to be much better off. So there's so many moving pieces when we talk about stuff like this, but that could be a great option, depending on where interest rates are when you're able to actually take that pension. Can you take a lump sum? Is it better for you to do so versus taking the actual pension from them? So keep in mind that usually most of these plans are set up. If you have the lump sum option, when rates decline, they want to get those funds off of their books, so that lump sum number will go up. If rates are higher, they will generally encourage you, the numbers will essentially encourage you to take the actual pension from them. But just make a pros and cons list. I think this is always something that we go back to. We do it with clients often when we're talking about these types of products. There's good and there's bad, but there are other options out there. Rich, 4% rule. What do you think?
4% rule is bunk. Smells like Rattland. It's not you're asking to take variable rate of return from fixed rate of return from variable assets. That's oil and water, right? Can it work sometimes? Yes. Can it not work sometimes. Danny, what happened during COVID? Do you remember the studies that were coming out about the 4% rule? How the 4% rule is maybe 1.8?
Yeah, 1.8, 2.3, 2.6, depending on the studies. I mean, way less.
So how am I supposed to tell you now to take 4%? Then what happens to your life?
You run out of money.
No. Right. No. Yeah. It's a rule of thumb, and Bill Bengen's a great guy. Okay. He was seminal study. It was revolutionary at the time. But the financial industry has the ability to take a study and never change it, because somewhere along the line it serves them.
Well, it needs to be more dynamic. And I think
It has to be dynamic. It has to be dynamic. Some years it could be 8%. Some years it could be 2%. Right? Last year you want to go ahead and give yourself a raise because of your return last year, and your bench, say we have clients that have a benchmark rate of return, they need 3% and they got 13. You want to go ahead and take 5% for the rest of for this next year? Go ahead. You have to monitor those withdrawals. It's not a mindless 4%, especially if I'm in a sequence of return or flat or market that's heading down. Doesn't work. So now I got to go ahead and tell your clients, Danny, that, hey, you know that 4%, you need that money to survive? It's 1.5. It's ridiculous. That's why if you have guaranteed income to cover most of your fixed expenses and some of your variable expenses, and you want to take 4%, but have a more aggressive portfolio, like you want to have a real all equity portfolio because you're really doing like an accumulation-lite. If you make a mistake, what does it matter? But there's no way I am going to go and put this 4% rule in some, like, lionize this rule. It's ridiculous. And you know what? You know how many financial advisors still go by this rule and follow this rule right off the cliff?
Well, Richard, when was that rule created? Like 50 years ago. I mean, think about that. I mean, probably not that long. Probably,
no, it's not that long ago.
But it
might as well. It doesn't
20,
matter.
30 years.
The financial service, it's about 30 years. And the financial services industry doesn't change anything. So to your point, it might as well be 50.
Well, not only that, think about this back in the 80s. Where was inflation? Where was wage growth? Where was everything else? I mean, that's the thing that it doesn't take into account, that we've been in a lower for longer environment. And I know everybody's, nobody likes where rates are right now. But from a historic perspective, these rates are not high. Now, the amount of debt that's out there, that changes the whole equation, right? I mean, you have to see these rates lower because of the amount of debt. But, certainly interesting. All right, Rich, thoughts on multi-year guaranteed annuities. Are they safe?
You answer that.
I think depending on the company, I mean, there's so many things we have to account for when we look at any type of annuities. Number one, the solvency of the company. What are they doing with the actual funds in their reserve? How long have they been around? I tell people, if we go look at something like that, we would go and, number one, we're going to scour the earth for the best one that's there. But we're not always going to go with the one that's going to pay you the most in interest, because just like a bond, these companies are rated for a person. And we're going to have to go in and say, well, we can go out and buy one from a company that's going to pay you more, but how long are they going to be there? What other strings are attached? Many times when you see something that looks too good to be true, it probably is. So stick with something that's safe, secure, that's going to be around. Understand your state's guarantee funds from a protection perspective. I think that's always a good thing to do. But yeah, I think in general, if you do your homework, do it right, understand the liquidity problems you could potentially have with that. So this is something where, from a diversification perspective, you may use this instead of a CD, or you want to defer taxes on after-tax funds to a later date, things like that. That's where this could become really advantageous on a product like that. But once again, these need to be planned for, not sold. And, if all somebody has is a hammer, everything is a nail. And so while, I'm in my 40s and we could have a guy in their 60s or 70s or 80s and we go to that steak dinner, that guy's probably going to sell us all the same exact product. And that may or may not be the right thing. So you need to understand. That's why we're such big advocates. I mean, obviously as certified financial planners, but and biased for what we do, but we are tremendous advocates of a financial plan, because that'll take the inventory of assets. That'll help give us the information that we need to help guide people in the right direction. and say, well, maybe you don't really need this, or maybe this would be a wise idea. And it's different for everybody.
Yeah. Hey, Brent, do the cookbook. What does it say?
Tom, right. All right, Tom. We will get your information as well. Hope you'll enjoy this cookbook. It is pretty cool. All right. You answer this question. This is a quick one. Can you convert your required minimum distribution?
No.
Now, what can you do though? But I think that, it's crazy.
I can go to Rattland. I can do that.
Yeah,
I can do, depending on my age. Of course, if I'm before retirement age, like in other words, if I'm like, what's the current RMD age? 73.
Correct.
But at 70 and a half, I could do it. I could start qualified charitable distributions.
Yeah.
So for, if I want to save taxes and start tapping my IRA, but that's a way to save some cash on your taxes. If you have a charitable intent, you can certainly provide some of your RMD or all of your RMD to charity, up to $100,000.
It actually went up just a tad bit this year.
Like it's not much more.
Yeah, but that's one thing I think that's often left on the table. You have somebody that tithes, that gives to charity, and they're going ahead and pulling those funds out, paying taxes, and then donating the funds. We can actually skip that first step and just go directly from your IRA to, your charity of choice. So keep that in mind. It's a great tool to reduce taxes. We can do that directly from the custodian. Talk to your advisor about that, and I think that's a great thing that you can look at. All right, another question. Christy said, if we're over our income limit, can I do a Roth conversion when we are over that income limit for the year? So over the income limit to contribute, you could still convert.
There's no income limit to convert.
Yeah.
Like the government would prefer, you got $1 million IRA, they would love for you to convert it all.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know what the Roth is, right? Dan and I have been talking about Roths before they got sexy. But we've been talking about Roths for like 8 years, right? But think about it. It's the J.G. Wentworth of accounts, right? I'm going to put a little earworm in your head. I need money and I need cash now, right? They need cash now, right? You can go ahead and do a Roth conversion, but time it. Look at where your taxes are. Try to fill up your marginal tax rate, and you can do something called surgical Roth conversion.
Yeah, don't want to do it all in 1 year, likely.
Yeah, so Roth conversion can work for a lot of people. We're very big advocates for it. You might do a mega backdoor Roth through your employer if they allow after-tax contributions. I'm currently retired, not receiving. Can I do Roth conversion? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Rich, you can do that. In other words, you don't need earned income to do a Roth conversion. And if you're in the lower bracket and you have some room, you can actually do a little more. But you got to run the numbers and see. But yeah, there are some low income years that you might have, say, for example, and you want to start moving your 401k money. Because keep in mind, when most people retire, another financial rule of thumb that has killed everybody is, put all your money in pre-tax accounts. Well, what happens when you retire, when you put all your money in pre-tax accounts? Everything I do is taxable. I have no tax diversification whatsoever. Anything I want to buy, anything I want to give to my children, whatever I want to do, I am in jeopardy of causing taxation on Social Security and IRMA. Haven't you had examples of clients that wanted to buy homes, vacation homes, Danny, and they had to take the money out of their IRAs and then get hit with this huge tax bill?
Yeah, all the time. It's and that's the problem with having everything in those pre-tax accounts, is that you can get in trouble with that. So if, like Richard, in your example there, you need to go, build out a financial plan, understand,
Right.
Your income taxes, any and everything that you have that's coming in, and then you can back into those numbers. And as you were talking about with Christy, you can very strategically do so. Now, Christy, if you're still working, think about, the other aspects of this. If you have a 401k, you may have a Roth element to that you can actually contribute to. So this is one thing that I think is still not explained properly, or maybe it's just a misconception that's often we see quite a bit that you may have a Roth 401k and everybody's like, well, shoot, I make too much money. I can't put funds into the Roth 401k. Roth 401k has no income contribution limits for that. So only that Roth IRA does. So you may want to think about utilizing it like that. Now, one other thing is somebody mentioned backdoor. If you actually have a traditional IRA, so funds not in the 401k, we now have to be concerned about the pro rata rule. So you could actually try to do that backdoor contribution, and it may end up costing you more than you think, because what that is typically you do a non-deductible contribution to your traditional IRA, then you convert those proceeds over to the Roth, and then you get into some trouble there. So something else to think about. Like Rich said, we may get cut off here in a minute. Sometimes we get some new software. It may.
Is there a target for pre-tax and after tax? Is there a target? I'll tell you my target. I would rather have 60 to 70% in after-tax money. But that's my own rule. But you want at least 50-50. You want to balance it out between pre and post, right, Danny? You want to have some money in post-tax money or after-tax, tax-free, right? You certainly want to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to, think about, how do you give yourself the most flexibility later? If you have those low income years right now, do you go ahead and start moving funds over? Those targets are going to look a little bit different for everybody based on, what you're currently making, other specific income that you may have. Obviously going right back to the plan. And then think outside the box. Are there other things that you can do? So a lot of times we'll have a high income earner who may have a permanent life insurance policy that they're not using properly. So you may be able to actually overfund a permanent life insurance policy that has advantageous loan provisions in it, where later you could take a loan against it versus taking a withdrawal and get tax-free funds out. But those are things that we could do a whole other visit on this. Stan says we haven't mentioned the HSA. That's right, we haven't gotten there. HSA is a fantastic tool. It is the best retirement account in the world, as everybody knows. And Stan, you clearly do. It is probably my favorite account. It's the only account that gives you, funds go in tax-free, grow tax-free. You pull them out for retirement, medical expenses. You can use those funds tax-free. Problem, you can't put a ton of money into it. And a lot of people use them and treat them more like an FSA, a flexible spending account, versus a savings account. So this is something that I would put those funds aside, and you can use that for retirement income later, because what do most people spend in retirement? They spend a ton of money on healthcare. And so in fact, HealthView Services, Fidelity, depending on which study you look at, you're likely a couple at 65 is probably going to spend 250. And I've seen studies all the way up to 400,000, Rich, in medical expenses. So we would consider that a way to use that for retirement income, because that's going to be part of your expenses.
So Doug says, I did a withdrawal from my IRA rollover, then contributed to Roth. So not getting that. Custodian said I could have done a Roth conversion. So listen, you need to, I had a client who actually bring this up yesterday. You need earned income to contribute to a Roth IRA. You cannot just move money from an IRA rollover, take it out and contribute to Roth. That's a conversion.
The questions that we got a lot of before were surrounding bonds, Rich. So number one, credit quality. Number two, duration. And then, how would somebody use them? Also, I saw, Paul, you had a great question on, should you be taking some of your profits from stocks, moving those towards to bonds to lock in, kind of create your own annuity or pension? You could.
What's wrong with that?
You may already have enough in bonds. So it varies, right? And so I think that, you do need to look at all those things, but do you like AA corporates other better than treasuries? Right now, one thing that we've noticed over the last several years is that there's not a whole lot of spread between, even the high yield versus a treasury, which would be considered probably the more of the, gold standard type of really safe area.
Paid enough. Yeah. You're not getting paid enough to take the risk in corporate. The spread's too thin. I'd stick with treasuries.
Yeah,
I really would.
At some point when that spread widens, you're going to have some really nice corporates that you can find that are going to be a lot more advantageous. The problem will be is that where will rates be when they actually physically widen? And at what point are you paying a premium? I did notice earlier we've got so much in the chat, but somebody mentioned, when we're looking at these types of investments, do you wait until they actually, the premium, right? Like right now, you can find some of these at decent prices, maybe even a discount. But some of these are going to be at a significant premium down the road just to get that coupon.
Right. Exactly right. So, and there's nothing wrong. Listen, I understand inflation. I understand all this stuff everybody talks about. Bonds are a very important part of your portfolio. And my emergency reserve in cash, at least I'm earning something in a high yield savings account. All right. Rates are not going to zero. And the Fed's going to have to take their time to lower rates. Thus, you're still getting pretty decent rates on yields compared to the past, the recent past, anyway. So.
Yeah. So now in duration, that varies with everybody. I've talked to some people who want to do strictly 6-month CDs or treasury bills, and then they roll them. The problem you'll face at some point will likely be reinvestment risk. And so unless you believe that inflation is going to continue to run, which we're not getting a big indication that that's the case. I know we're hearing a lot about tariffs. That seems to be the headline news right now. We've seen the impact of that long term. There's a lot of great studies out there. In fact, I can place a link to one of them that I've followed for a while at the Tax Foundation that shows you what the impact of like the 2018, 2019 studies were from tariffs. We kind of have a moderate duration at the moment. I would say we do have some short intermediate. We also have a position in a long duration bond. And if you guys listen to Lance, which I'm sure all you do, you would know, that we still think that rates are going to decline. And it's a function of math from the interest rate perspective, all the other things that are occurring at the moment. So I don't think we would advocate to do all or nothing in one area or the other, but I think this is an area where you can ladder out some fixed income and use that to your advantage.
Absolutely.
So another question on the HSA is, do you need to be in a, can you contribute to it? Let's see. We just got a bunch more questions. Let's see. Oh, do you need earned income to contribute to an HSA? Yes, you need to be on a high deductible health insurance plan as well. So not everybody has access to it as well. That's the other problem that we see with that.
You got to keep in mind that everybody has got good suggestions. It's how you put it together is going to be very different than your neighbor, as I mentioned in the beginning, right? It's very personal to you. There's nothing you should keep an open mind. You should keep an open mind. Don't hate one product over another product. No, I'll never do that. No, understand what it's about before you make a decision, because there are things you've heard from other people that don't make a lot of sense. And you have to understand that you got to do your own homework or work with a fiduciary to do it. But be open-minded. It's not going to be perfect, and it's going to be yours, and it'll work for you. But there's much more to me in art in decumulation there is in accumulation. And you have to keep much more of an open mind to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I know you guys have a lot of questions here that we may have not gotten to. I think we've answered most of them to some extent. Tune in to the Real Investment Show. We'll be covering some of the remainder of these on Wednesday with Lance and I, and Rich will be covering it on Friday as well. So we're going to spend some time with that. We do have Rich put together a presentation that we're going to probably do more of a more granular getting into the weeds of some very specific things from a product perspective. What does that look like? How do you use it? What are the guardrails you need to be looking at today? We just really wanted to spend some time with y'all and just kind of shoot off the cuff, answer some questions. A lot of great questions today. So we certainly do appreciate it. We've got a really good team. So if you guys have more specific questions, we are very happy to answer. Go to ask a question. If you want somebody to reach out and just spend some more time one-on-one, we can certainly set that up and accommodate that. But, keep the questions coming. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is always a pleasure spending a Saturday morning with y'all. If you're not on the YouTube channel, please go like, subscribe, and, we'll see you guys there this next week.
It's important for us to know if you want these kinds of topics, what kinds of topics. Do you find these enjoyable? You spend your time on a Saturday with us. We really appreciate that so much. We understand there's a million other things you could be doing. If you don't want to be contacted, we're not going to contact you. We just want to make sure, we're doing the right thing. You liked it. You like the format. It's important for us as we move forward. But what else? You can close it up.
Give one more mug away.
Oh. Spin the wheel. The Wheel of Fortune music to this? Or Price is Right?
Jay Young. All right. Thanks for joining us, Jay. We will get you some information as well here and get a mug out to you. But yeah, keep the questions coming. If you guys have more specific stuff, just please don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to spend some time visiting on that. We'll do this again here shortly, talk a little bit more granular about it as we mentioned, and hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. We'll see you guys next week. Thank y'all.